All right, Miss Ashland, for your math, we are going to take all of the things we have been learning about the least common multiple, the least common denominator, making equivalent fractions, and we're going to use all that information to learn how to divide, or not divide, I'm sorry, to learn how to add or subtract fractions that don't have common denominators. You already know how to do it, you just don't know you know how to do it, so I'm going to show you today. You already know, like I said, all right? So watch this. So if we have the fractions 2/5 plus 1/4 plus 1/2. This looks different from any fractions that you have added thus far because why? What's going on here? They do not have the same denominator. So in order to add or subtract your fractions, they must have the same denominator. So we're going to have to find out the least common multiple or the least common denominator. Same thing for the numbers 5, 4, and 2. So for 5, if I count by 5s, I have 5, 10, 15, 20. If I count by 4s, I have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. If I count by 2s, I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. So my first common denominator that I come to for all three of those digits is 20. So 20 is going to be my new denominator. So I'm going to set up writing 20 as my new denominator in order to make equivalent fractions. Okay? So how many times will 2 go into 20? It'll go in there 10 times. So 1 times 10 is 10. How many times will 4 go into 20? It'll go in there 5 times. So 4 times 5 is 20. And 1 times 5 is 5. How many times does 5 go into 20? 4 times. 5 times 4 is 20. And 2 times 4 is 8. So we have just found our least common denominator. And we have just made equivalent fractions. So now we're ready to add our fractions. Have to have common denominators in order to add our fractions. So 8 plus 5 is 13. Plus 10 is 23. Our denominator stays exactly the same. 23 20ths. But that is improper. So I'm going to have to turn that into a whole or mixed number. It's definitely going to be a mixed number. 20 will go into 23 one time. 1 times 20 is 20. 3 minus 0 is 3. So 3 is our numerator and 20 is our denominator. So it's 1 and 3 20ths. Okay? So that is our answer. Let's look at a subtraction one. So if we have 3 and 1/4 minus 2 and 1/8, the first thing that we're going to have to do is what? We don't have common denominators. So the first thing we're going to have to do is find our least common multiple or least common denominator. Same thing. I'm going to bring over my whole numbers first. That's always important. And then I am going to figure out my least common denominator for 4 and 8. If I count by 4s, I have 4, 8. Oh, I'm already there to 8. So I know that 8 is going to be my least common denominator because I counted right to it. So I'm going to write my 8s for my denominator and get ready to make my equivalent fractions now. So 8 will go into 8 one time. 1 times 1 is 1. 4 will go into 8 2 times. 1 times 2 is 2. So I have common denominators. So now I am ready to subtract. 3 minus 2 is 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. And my denominator stays exactly the same. 1 and 1/8 is my answer. Okay, so that is how we're adding and subtracting fractions with denominators that are not the same. We're going to find the least common denominator. We're going to use it to make equivalent fractions, and then we will be ready to add or subtract. Look at on page 145 at section 1, letter A. We have 3/8 equals blank 16ths. So 8 times what equals 16ths? 2. So 3 times 2 equals 6. We're just making equivalent fractions. 9 times what equals 27? 3. So 5 times 3 equals 15. Letter C. 5 times what equals 10? 2. So 3 times 2 equals 6. Letter D. 4 times what equals 12? 3. So 1 times 3 equals 3. Section 2, write the least common denominator of these fractions. If we have 1/2 and 1/3, our denominators are 2 and 3. What is the least common denominator for 2 and 3? I have 2, 4, 6, 3, 6. So it would be 6. That's the first number I come to in both multiples of. 3/5, 1/3, and 2/15. So we're finding our least common denominator. 5, 10, 15. 15 is already there. So if I can get to 15 by 3s, then 15 is going to be my least common denominator. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. So 15 is my least common denominator. We have 4/9, 2/3, and 1/6. All right, so we got to find the first number we come to when we're counting by these numbers. So I have 9, 18, 27. Then I have 3, 6, 9. So I've come to 9 in both of them. But let's go to 6. I have 6, 12. So I've already passed 9 when I get to 6. So 9 is not going to work. So go back to 3. I have 3, 6, 9, 12, 18. I said 18 when I was counting by 9s. 9, 18. So 18 could possibly work. Let's look at our multiples of 6. We have 6, 12, 18. So my least common denominator is 18. Very good. Then I have 3/8 and 1/6. So I have to count by 8s and 6s. So 8, I have 8, 16, 24. And I think 6 times 4 is 24. 6, 12, 18, 24. So my least common denominator for 6 and 8 is going to be 24. Okay? Look at section 3. It says after finding the least common denominator and making equivalent fractions, answers it says add. I didn't read the first part. Add after finding the least common denominator and making equivalent fractions, and then it tells us that our answers should be in their lowest form. So we have to check and see if we can reduce our answers after doing all of that other stuff. Okay? All right, so number 1, we have 1/4 plus 1/2. Okay? Our least common denominator is going to be, I can count 2, 4. I can count up to 4 by 2, so it's definitely going to be 4. So I'll put my 4 here, put my 4 over here. 2 will go into 4 2 times, and 1 times 2 is 2. 4 will go into 4 1 time, and 1 times 1 is 1. And I'm ready to add my numerators. 1 plus 2 is 3. My denominator is 4. So it's 3/4 already in simplest form. Next I have 3/8 plus 1/4. So 3/8 plus 1/4, I have to find my least common denominator. I can count by 4s and get to 8. 4, 8. So 8 is going to be my least common denominator. Get my denominators written down, ready to make my equivalent fractions. 4 will go into 8 how many times? 2. 1 times 2 is 2. 8 will go into 8 how many times? 1. 3 times 1 is 3. I add up my numerators. 3 plus 2 is 5. My denominator is 8. 5/8 is my answer, and it is already in simplest form. Next I have 4 and 1/2 plus 6 and 1/3. I'm going to go ahead and bring my whole numbers over because I don't ever want to forget that. Because if I don't have my whole number in my answer, it won't be correct. And then I'm going to figure out my least common denominator. Excuse me, okay, stop. My least common denominator are least common multiples. Count by 2s, 2, 4, 6. Count by 3s, 3, 6. So 6 is my least common denominator. I'm going to write it and get ready to make my equivalent fractions. 2 will go into 6 3 times. 1 times 3 is 3. 3 will go into 6 2 times. 1 times 2 is 2. We add up my whole numbers. 4 plus 6 is 10. Go ahead and write my denominator. I know it's going to be 6. And my numerator is 3 plus 2 is 5. So 10 and 5/6 is my final answer. And for letter D, I have 3 and 2/5 plus 1 and 1/2. Always bring those whole numbers over first so we do not forget them. And then we have to figure out our least common denominator for 5 and 10. Counting by fives, I say 5, 10. Counting by twos, I can count by twos and get to 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So my least common denominator is 10. Go ahead and write that and get ready to make my equivalent fractions. 2 will go into 10 5 times. 1 times 5 is 5. 5 will go into 10 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. Add up my whole numbers. 3 plus 1 is 4. My denominator is going to be 10, and 4 plus 5 is 9. So 4 and 9/10 is my answer. Okay? Go ahead and turn your page to page 146. We have 1/2 minus 1/3. So we have to find our least common multiple, least common denominator. I would count 2, 4, 6, 3, 6. So 6 is my least common denominator. I'm going to write it. Get ready to make my equivalent fractions. 3 will go into 6 2 times. 1 times 2 is 2. 2 will go into 6 3 times. 1 times 3 is 3. Go ahead and write 6. My denominator is not going to change. Subtract my numerators. 3 minus 2 is 1. So 1/6 is my answer. Letter B, I have 4/5 minus 3/10. Why my board is rocking today. So I have to figure out my least common denominator. I can count by fives and get to 10. So 10 will be my least common denominator. 5, 10, and then 10, 20. So I'm going to write my 10 as my denominator, set up to make equivalent fractions. 10 will go into 10 1 time. 3 times 1 is 3. 5 will go into 10 2 times. 4 times 2 is 8. I'm ready to subtract. My denominator is going to stay the same. 8 minus 3 is 5. 5/10 can be reduced. How do I know? Automatically I know because I can count by fives and get to 10. So that tells me that 5 is going to be my greatest common factor that I have to divide by. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. So 1/2 is my answer there. Look at letter C. We have 2 and 6/7 minus 3/14. So just like when I'm adding or subtracting, I will always rewrite my problem, bringing my whole number over first. And then I'm ready to find my common denominator. I know that I can count by sevens and get to 14, 7, 14. So 14 is going to be my least common denominator. I'll go ahead and write that up and set up to make my equivalent fractions. 14 will go into 14 1 time. 3 times 1 is 3. 7 will go into 14 2 times. 6 times 2 is 12. I'm ready to subtract. Whole numbers, 2 minus 0 is 2. My denominator is 14. 12 minus 3 is, why is that stumping me? Is 9. Totally stumped me for a second. So we have 9/14, and that is in its lowest form. And our last one, we have 5 and 1/2 minus 2 and 1/4. Bringing my whole numbers over, don't want to forget them. Now I'm ready to find my least common denominator. I can count by twos and get to 4, 2, 4, and 4 were there. And we're counting by fours, so 4 is my least common multiple. Setting up to make my equivalent fractions. 4 will go into 4 1 time. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 will go into 4 2 times. 1 times 2 is 2. I subtract. 5 minus 2 is 3. 2 minus 1 is 1. And the denominator is 4. So 3 and 1/4 is my answer. Okay? Look at section 5. Change to whole or mixed numbers. Reduce if necessary. So 7/6. We're going to try and do this without writing it out as a division problem. 6 will go into 7 1 time. 1 times 6 is 7. 7 minus 6 is 1. And our denominator is 6. 1 and 1/6. Then we have 3/2. 3/2. 2 will go into 3 1 time. 1 times 2 is 2. 3 minus 2 is 1. So it's 1 and 1 half. 16 over 8. 16 divided by 8 is simply 2. And 9 over 4. 4 will go into 9 2 times. 4 times 2 is 8. 9 minus 8 is 1. That's our numerator. And our denominator is the same, 2 and 1/4. Okay? So if you need me today, if you have any questions about any of that, please do not hesitate to message me or video call me, whatever you need to do so that I can make sure you have an understanding of that, okay? You'll complete your math assignment by completing your interactive worksheet.